Yes, while the mortal world doubts and questions, I know exactly what I am. I am the ceaseless wheel, the last scholar of Golb. I am your doom.
You sure about that? You sure about that?
Is the Lich still ruined is a question that some people still ask me every now and again, and considering that I have been working on this massive Lich project, which has been absolute hell due to the fact that it's over 30 pages long and the voice work is killing me slowly, I decided to come back to this question. Now, I did do a video on this prior, however, in my opinion, that video was poorly made, as I made it just a few days after the original episode and didn't really take the time to really think about it in depth. So here we are about a month later, and I've had time to digest the content. Now, I can safely say that this was still a poor writing decision. Now, before you grab your pitchforks, let me explain in great detail why this was still a poor decision on the writer's part, and why the follow-through just falls flat. So for those of you who do not know, in Fionna and Cake, the Lich managed to exterminate all life within one timeline, which resulted in him falling into a deep depression. This would culminate into him traveling with Simon into the space between, or the void, where Golb usually floats away from everything. Here, he would proclaim his frustrations with the situation, how he did everything in Golb's name and yet was still feeling empty. Now this alone is not entirely terrible, it's the execution of this that absolutely destroys the character. So let's start off simple, his devotion to Golb. The main thing that this premise is based on is underdeveloped at best. Now in my previous video when I offered my criticisms, many of you decided to come into the comments saying, well, we knew he was a servant of Golb, it's common knowledge. Okay, first off, in the original series there was a single sentence of this, no context whatsoever. Of course, I and many others assumed that he was a servant of some kind. However, nothing in the previous statement indicated that everything he had ever done was for this one entity. There is also no deeper connection between the two beings. The Lich worshipped Golb, that's fine. However, the Lich was never given an actual purpose by Golb, as Golb does not communicate whatsoever, meaning this starts the first major problem. The Lich just did this for nothing. Going by what we know, the Lich literally just met Golb and decided to murder everyone for their glory. A decision that now has no backing for why he did it, aside from the fact that he thought it would be cool, because he had no actual understanding of what his god, the one thing he was doing this all for, even wanted. Next up is the fact that this creates continuity errors that both further harm the Lich, but also mess with the world itself, with previous statements and events now being retconned entirely. Now everyone knows about the Prismo statement, something I don't need to go into detail with, so let's move on to something pretty massive. See, the thing about Fionna and Cake is that this is not just a spin-off, it's a prequel. Fionna and Cake takes place before Distant Lands. And who is the main bad guy in Distant Lands? Most beloved episode ever? You guessed it, the Lich. This opens up a massive can of worms because, as we all know, the Lich is linked to all variants of himself. We even know this because Farmworld Lich had knowledge of events that only the original Lich had experienced. This means unless that original piece of writing was retconned out of existence, something that hasn't been hinted at or stated, means that the Lich from Distant Lands has the memories of losing his purpose and finding out that the only reason for him doing all of this was a lie. And unlike before where you can simply say, well, his purpose is to cause mass death, you can't say that because that is no longer the case. Everything he did was entirely up to his own free will. There is also the major problem of the fact that the Lich never actually completed his goal. He destroyed one out of nearly limitless multiverses and lost his purpose and gave up, despite knowing that there is more than just the one timeline. This does irreversible damage because in a way it removes the idea of him being a looming threat. The fact that this one gave up without truly finishing his goal shows that other versions can also just give up after enough time passes. The idea that he always returns is no longer a factor. No longer is he a looming threat of the death of all things, he's just a madman that doesn't even believe in what he is doing anymore. He's doomed to continuously do something that actually has no value, and again, that is actually a great premise, but the way they go about it is lackluster and underdeveloped, because he can just do anything else and it harms the character that was built up to this point. To make matters worse, this was an attempt to give the Lich more depth and to have him mirror Simon, with the two having lost their purpose and place in the world. While good on paper, this was a poor choice. One, because the Lich should not be used to mirror Simon of all people, and one of the major lores of the Lich was that his ways of thinking were alien and absolute. He knew what he was and what his purpose was. He already possessed depth as a character character, as the sheer mystery and power behind his thoughts and actions kept people engaged and shows exactly the monster that he is. But with Fionna and Cake, he not only loses that, but also loses all of the nuance that his previous character possessed. Surprisingly, by making him more human, you actually gave him less to work with, as all he is now is a religious fanatic who acts entirely based on ignorance. Anyway, that's all I have for this one. Still disagree? Tell me why below. Think I missed anything? Also tell me below. Thanks to my patrons on Patreon. I know I've been gone for a bit, but this year has been rough behind the scenes, both in terms of life as well as production. But I won't keep you, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye.